This is Covering the Spread. Here are your hosts, Jim Saunders and Dr. Ed Feng.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome on into Covering the Spread. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com, where today we are getting you set for Tokyo 2020 in the Summer Olympics by bringing on Drew Dinsick. Whale Cap are going to swing by and break down his thoughts on everything. Literally everything to get you set for the Summer Games. My name is Jim Saunders. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, joined here as always by Dr. Ed Feng. You can find his work over at thepowerrank.com. And Ed, we have the Olympics coming up. We have the NBA Finals wrapping up. We had the Open Championship last week. We have NFL news everywhere. It's kind of hard to keep up with everything going down right now. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I have no complaints. I've had a lot of fun digging more into track and field than I ever have. I'm a huge fan of the sport, but you have to be more than a fan to bet it. So looking forward to talking about that. Happy that Milwaukee got it done in the NBA Finals. That was a pretty awesome series. I talked to someone casually on the street. He's like, "Yeah, stop paying attention after Phoenix went up 2-0." It's like, well, oops, you missed a lot.
Yeah. So. And the way that that series played out, I think was interesting. We could talk about this in Covering the Past, but I don't think it's interesting to talk about it here. We were talking last week about how you judged those two teams and how it related to the way you wanted to bet things, where you could take Phoenix plus 4.5 for game 4, or you could take the Bucks series price at plus 200. And I think that the thought process that you had behind that really showed the value of that with the way that series played out.
Oh, cool. I'm glad you think so. I mean, I think the analysis was sound, but that's not exactly how I thought it would turn out. I really thought it was going to go back to game 7.
Yeah.
But Giannis was amazing. Good for him. And just, it's nice. I mean, they've gotten a lot of grief over the last couple of years for being an awesome team during the regular season and just completely playing awful in the playoffs. So, That was not the case in this series.
There was still a Fire Budenholzer sign at the parade. That was still there, which seems a little harsh, but
a little harsh.
But the Bucks, the NBA Finals champions. Congrats to them on that, and congrats to anyone who had a Bucks ticket as well and used Ed's logic to maybe grab the Bucks at plus 200 to win the Finals prior to game number 4. As mentioned, we're going to talk to Drew Dinsick today. You can find him on Twitter at whale_capper. He, of course, is the host of the Bet the Edge podcast for NBC Sports and the host of the Deep Dive podcast. We've had Drew on to talk so many different sports. It's only appropriate to have him on to talk all the sports here for the Tokyo Olympics. Talk about how to bet them. We're going to see where he sees value in individual markets, talk about his swimming background, talk about medal counts and all that. So it should be a whole lot of fun. But first, before we do that, make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, radio.com, you name it, you can find us there. And while you're there, if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review as well. NFL season coming up quick. So get those subscriptions in now to get podcasts as they go live each and every day. Also have to talk back about last week with the Open Championship. We had Brandon Gadula on to preview that. So let's go back and see how things went for the Open Championship.
Covering the Past.
As mentioned last week, it was Brandon Gadula on previewing the Open Championship. You can find Brandon on Twitter at Gadula13. He is off enjoying a vacation right now, so he won't see it. Not that he checks Twitter that often anyway, but either way, he won't see it. But either way, follow him on Twitter at Gadula13. Colin Morikawa won. He was not one of Brandon's outrights. He liked Xander Schauffele, Patrick Cantlay, Tony Finau, and Lucas Herbert for outrights. But Finau and Xander both golfed well. Just couldn't quite hang on with the leaders there. And Ed, you said you watched on Sunday. Any takeaways for you from Colin Morikawa's victory there?
So I've watched the 3 of the 4 majors. I've watched the last round, and it struck me like what an outlier we're watching. So for a golfer, that last stretch, like you have to play well to come out first out of 150 golfers or whatever it is, right? And yeah, he clearly played well. I thought, but do you know what I mean? Like, there's in some sense you're always watching an outlier performance if you're watching the very tail end of a broadcast at a major. So I thought that was interesting. I actually wrote about Tony Finau, top 20. Oh, actually, we're about to talk about that. So in your second.
Yeah.
We can wait.
Finau. Yeah. It was great. Big fan of Tony Finau as a result of that. But Colin Morikawa just he's so young. He looks young too. So like that helps add to the mystique, I would say. He's precise off the tee, such a good iron player. And when he putts, good things happen. And that's what we saw throughout this entire weekend. So really fun to watch Colin Morikawa and his ascent here recently. The non-outrights for Brandon, he had Victor Hovland at -102 over Louis Westhuizen. Louis' just disgusting hot streak in majors continued. He finished third at 11 under. So past 3 major finishes for Louis Westhuizen, second, third. Seems like he's got this thing figured out by now. Brandon also had Tyrrell Hatton at -112 over Shane Lowry. Hatton missed a cut. Lowry finished 12th. So Brandon was white hot for the Masters when we talked to him last time. Some aggression had to come at some point, and that seemed like it happened here. But, I still trust Brandon for everything here, and the regression comes for all of us. I'm looking forward to hearing Brandon's thoughts on the Olympics coming pretty soon. So tune in for that. I think he'll have simulations for both the men's and women's Olympics over on numberFire.com. You mentioned Tony Finau. I had Finau to finish top 20, which was +210. It hit barely. I'll take it. Win's a win for sure. He finished 15th. He shot a 67 on Sunday. I was at a wedding, and we were watching on Saturday, and he had a couple of erratic shots. We were getting set for the wedding, and I was a little nervous with old Tony, but he did come back with a nice Sunday, finished 15th. I'll take the +210 hit there. No objections here with Tony Finau. And Ed, you said you talked about that in your email too?
Yeah, I wrote about it in my email the next day, partially because of your analysis, partially because of Brandon Gadula, and also partially because of Abnormally Distributed on Twitter. He's a pro bettor. Yeah. He has been on Rob Pizzola's podcast. Really good listen. And so anyways, all three of you guys liked Tony Finau. I wrote about it. I bet it. So thank you very much. But I also wanted to point out, it was really interesting for me to do that analysis because I definitely trust Brandon's results. Obviously, I've been following his stuff for every major this year. And Abnormally Distributed's results were very different. So it shows you, I have no idea what the guy's doing, except I know that he's a PhD level researcher. Right. So I thought that was interesting. And the other thing that was interesting is Morikawa had the highest odds in his projections. Mm-hmm. So yeah, for me, golf, I'm never running golf numbers, but it's interesting for me to get a lot of people's opinions, look at other people's numbers. And it kind of helps me be a consumer of other people's numbers. Like my customers are consumers of mine. So it's definitely helpful.
Well, because you know what your consumers want, which is good. Also, with Normally Distributed, you mentioned that he was on Rob's podcast, so I listened to it on your recommendation, and it was awesome. He's talking about living in Montana,
near the Canadian border, so he could get
if you have not listened to the Circles Off podcast in general with Rob Pizzola, I'd recommend that. But that episode specifically, he bets on the truck series in NASCAR, which is the AA of NASCAR. I love the truck series. It's super fun to watch, but I haven't found anyone who bets it hardcore before. So that was fun too. So,
how much can you get down on the truck series?
I assume plenty if I had to guess. But I haven't, when the COVID break was happening last year, I did enough Xfinity stuff and that was fun, but didn't get into trucks. So I would check him out. A Normally Distributed episode with Rob Pizzola on the Circles Off podcast was really fun to listen to. And if you have not listened to it, I would recommend it. If he's high on Tony Finau and Colin Morikawa, he is doing something right. So that's a look back at last week. Now let's get set for this week and next week too, because we have the Tokyo Olympics coming up. We're going to break down that with Drew Dinsick. He is on Twitter at whale_capper. He, of course, has his new podcast, relatively new, over at NBC Sports, the Bet the Edge podcast with Sarah Perlman. You can find that in the show notes over on numberFire, a link to that podcast there. Really fun listening. And of course, he is still doing a deep dive podcast as well. We're going to get his thoughts on the Tokyo Olympics, medal counts, and much more. But first, the Olympics are back as the world's best athletes gather in Tokyo for a summer showdown. FanDuel is giving fans an exclusive opportunity to get in on the action with the USA gold medal bonus. All you have to do is head over to FanDuel Sportsbook and place $100+ in wagers on the Olympics prior to July 26th. So still a couple days to get in on this. You'll be rewarded a $1 bonus in site credit for each gold medal the United States wins at the Olympics, regardless if your wager wins or loses. Show your support for Team USA and head over to FanDuel today. Must be 21 plus and present in Colorado, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, or Virginia. Bonus issued as a non-withdrawable site credit that expires in 7 days. Max bonus $50. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In Colorado, 1-800-522-4700. In Iowa, 1-800-BETS-OFF. In Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. For confidential help in Michigan, 1-800-270-7117. Or in Tennessee, call the Red Line, 1-800-889-9789.
Covering the present.
Let's bring Drew Dinsick into covering the spread now to talk about Tokyo 2020 and the Summer Olympics. And Drew, we've had you on to talk basketball, NFL, tennis, everything. And now we're going to take the sports knowledge and just toss it in a blender because there are like 90,000 sports to talk about for the Olympics. How are you doing today?
Oh, I couldn't be happier. This is one of those rare once every 4 years, in this case 5 years, that you really get to kind of flex your handicapping muscles and really try something new. It's interesting. It's different. I bet pretty heavily into the Rio markets, and it was a great experience. I got into the Winter Olympics betting as well last cycle. So this will be the third Olympics that I've really heavily kind of handicapped some of the markets, and second Summer Olympics for me. So I'm very excited because really, like, betting aside, I'm going to watch probably 80 hours of Olympics in the next 2 weeks. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and having the betting action on it does help a little bit for sure. So I want to talk to you about that because it's your second Summer Olympics. And for us, like as bettors, we're used to large samples. Like for NFL, you got 16 games every week to analyze. Okay, are my numbers good or do they suck? With the Summer Olympics specifically, we don't really have that sample. So does that impact your confidence here, knowing that you just kind of, we don't have a lot of data to know how the efficacy of our numbers?
Yeah, but it cuts both ways. In the same sense that the sports bettor, sports bettor himself or herself doesn't really have a ton to go off in terms of sample size. The bookmaker doesn't either, and so there are for sure some markets where small pieces of information, small areas of expertise will go a long way to finding advantage edges. I don't think there's any NFL weekend I would wake up and feel high confidence that I have a 300% edge on a side or total. But there are for sure, some markets that will come and go as we go through this Olympic cycle where I'll be like, nope, that number is wrong. It's minus 200. It should be minus 2,000, or that is plus 150. It should be minus 800. Like that sort of stuff will come and is super fun to pick away at because I guess there are 339 gold medals that will be awarded. I think, if you shop around, you're going to be able to find a market for almost every one of those medals over the course of this 2 weeks. So, there will be a lot of opportunities to kind of pick out some soft stuff. And I think it should be, if you're doing your homework, if you're reading the rules, you can probably find an advantage in some sports and some spots. Just right off the top of my head, to give you an example, like softball, they were softball lines for preliminary stuff going on between like USA and Italy, and USA was minus 9.5 run line handicap against Italy, and the total was 11.5. And you read into the rules, and it's like, oh wait, there's mercy rule in softball. Like the USA can't win by 9.5. Like in order for USA to win by 9.5, they have to be up by 6 in the 5th inning and hit a grand slam. Like it was like a super narrow kind of probably outcome that could have gotten that even home. Of course, they win like 2-0 or something. So it was never in doubt. But like stuff like that. If you just kind of read the rules, if you find sort of the micro edges in certain sports and certain spots, you're going to have a profitable Olympics.
So Drew, are there any sports in the Olympics that you like more than others?
Well, for sure, from an entertainment standpoint, swimming in week 1, track and field in week 2 are sort of the main events. From just a kind of, you're going to sit down, you're going to consume the primetime broadcast. You're going to, these are the only time in the 4-year cycle that you're really going to get to kind of sink into what is going on. So those tend to be much more interesting to me than sort of the team sports stuff, the basketballs, the soccers. I mean, the idea that like Olympic basketball or Olympic soccer is going to be anywhere close to the quality that you just saw in the NBA finals or you just saw in Euro 2020 is crazy. Like it's just not going to be as good, so focus more on the sports where you have all these athletes who have put 4 or 5 years into preparing for this moment. That's the kind of stuff that gets me going. And for sure in this week one, swimming is that sport that's going to draw most of my attention.
Yeah, that's hilarious, Drew, because I was watching a little bit of Brazil and Germany because I feel like anytime Brazil and Germany get together in soccer, you should watch it. Yeah, it was not at the quality that you would expect of a German team. I mean, they often don't qualify for the Olympics and did not send even like their best U23 team. Richarlison actually scored a hat trick, but it was kind of comical because he missed his best opportunity in the first half. So, I can definitely back you up on those team sports.
Yeah, the swimming is, I have personal connection to it on top of just the fact that it's like hey, once every 4 years, this is a big deal kind of thing. Like I swam growing up. I swam through college. I definitely kind of have a specific respect for the commitment that you have to kind of give to the sport if you're going to get to this level. It is certainly not something that many athletes can handle because when you think of sports, you think of entertainment. If you think of like, hey, we're playing sports, yeah, it's a team sport. It's just fun. We're all having fun. We're trying to win together. Swimming predominantly, particularly at the end, the Olympic level. It's an individual sport. You're trying to beat your own times. You're trying to train. It's quiet. You're always in your own head. You're putting in 4 hours a day swimming for months and months and months, and in this case, years and years and years before you really get the opportunity to show off on the world stage. And it's tough. And you have all-time great champions like Michael Phelps who've been very candid about like how difficult it is to kind of deal with the mental aspects of performing at that level. And I'm extremely relieved that they are actually having these Olympics. Like if something happens and they cancel at some point and we don't get to see Simone Biles do the routines that she has prepared for this moment, that will be a history defining loss. Like for us as a society, like we should be able to see that she's the greatest gymnast that the world has ever, that has ever walked this earth. And if she doesn't get to do it at the Olympic stage, that will be just a tragedy. And similarly for some of these swimmers.
Yeah, and timing is just so big with having so few chances like this that, every year gets pushed back is detrimental to all of us as like sports watchers, which stinks. But I got to know, Drew, like what was your event where based on the way that you bet, I'm putting my money on individual medley. Am I right?
Yeah, for sure. I was into the 4 a.m. I did the breast. Okay. I had a strong breaststroke, which helps you in the 4 a.m. If you don't have a strong breaststroke, you're kind of in deep trouble when it comes to the IM. But I loved the IM. I did some distance freestyle and the 100 and 200 breaststroke as well.
Okay. I feel good about this. So we've got an inside edge via Drew. Already knows how the swimming stuff. So let's keep on with swimming here. Talk about men's and swimming. We can bet on who will win gold in pretty much every event. But I'm curious from a data perspective, where are you finding numbers for swimming? Or is there like a site that you go to for this? Are you leaning on like times? How do you decide what you want to bet for swimming?
Yeah. It's very tough. There's a lot of qualitative angles because all of the data that exists has to be contextualized to what that athlete was training for, what they were racing for in that moment. The best example I can give you is if you just pull up the Australian trials. Australia and the United States are your two swimming powerhouses generally. There's a lot of very good European teams. There'll be some Russian golds this year. There'll be some Chinese golds this year, but predominantly we're talking about Australia versus United States when it comes to swimming. They do trials at the same time. They both happened in June, and you can kind of basically take the times from those trials and just stack up like, okay, well, 1 month ago, she swam this and she swam this. Like pretty obviously she should win, right? But then you dig a little deeper contextually, and I can kind of use like the 400 freestyle as the best example of this. Katie Ledecky is coming in as the defending champion, defending gold medalist. defending world record setter at the last Olympics. She's a very well-known U.S. swimmer, probably the face of the women's swim team, the leader of the swim team, the kind of the most experienced and and sort of the anchor really of women swimming in the United States. You would think she might be favored in the 400 freestyle because she's won it, almost every time she swum it in her entire life. Yet you look at the markets and she's the underdog to a woman named Ariana Titmus from Australia. And it's like, well, how could that be? And you look at Titmus's times from Aussie trials. Well, she almost broke Katie Ledecky's world record at trials. And so it's like, well, how did Katie do? Well, she was well off of her pace. And so it's like, oh, okay, so Titmus is great. She's next. Ledecky's out of it. She's done. That's all she wrote, right? No, there's lots more context to this, right? Katie Ledecky. Yeah, sure. Go, Katie Ledecky.
Oh, sorry. I can't help but jump in because there's a bunch of stuff I want to ask you because I'm more into the track side as a runner. But if you're Katie Ledecky, you're not peaking for the U.S. trials.
Why would you? You're not going to lose.
Maybe you do. Maybe you do have a reason to peak for the U.S. trials, but
no. If you are worried about making the team, obviously you're going to taper. You're going to get your best performance on that day to make sure you don't miss your chance to go to the Olympics. Well, that's not her mindset at all. She could win going away in these events and qualify first and get her, secure her spot for the Olympic team. And that's what she did. In fact, most swimmers, you go through about a year-long training cycle, 8 months to a year, depending on, what your off season is and what events you do. Katie Ledecky's is almost certainly a year because she's a distance swimmer. Year-long training cycle. She's doing 10,000, 12,000 meters a day. And you get into about a month until about a month, maybe 6 weeks until you're ready for peak performance and you start to bring down your yardage little by little, giving your body a little bit more rest. And most other swimmers who are competing at trials came down to about 3,000 yards, right? And that's because they were ready to peak at trials because they did not want to miss the team. Katie Ledecky pretty much swam through trials. She was going about 6,000 meters a day, didn't really sweat it, and really was intent on saving her best performances for the Olympics. Now, it's possible that Titmus did the same. It's possible that Titmus has more taper in her and she can have an even better swim. But without question, if you take just the data on Ledecky's performances at trials and you try to model that out as to how she's going to do at the Olympics, you are going to come in with a very conservative estimate of how fast she will swim. And I would say that given the experience, given the, kind of the legacy and what is really at stake here and just the fact that, that there wasn't, a championship meet in 2020, like she could have built up a base that is just astronomically huge. And this drop in yardage could pop, some unbelievably impressive swims. And in fact, the confidence that she had to swim through and train 6,000 meters a day through trials when you're going, because that's an arduous process in and of itself. You're doing heats, you're doing semis, you're doing finals. She swam 4 events. There's a new event for the women this year that is the mile. So it's longer than she's ever competed at in competition at the trials or the Olympics, and she added that to her program. And so all of that on top of continuing to swim through, like you can expect that the times you got from her at trials are not anywhere indicative of what she's capable of at the Olympics. That doesn't really help you when you're trying to match her up against Titmus because you're kind of stuck with, okay, well, did Titmus peak at Aussie trials? Was that as fast as she can go? Is there any indication that that she can go faster? And I guess if you've been handicapping or following U.S. swimming for the last 5, or following swimming at the Olympics for the last 3-4 cycles, going back to when they were in Australia, the Aussies do this a lot. A lot of them swim their best races at Aussie trials and then show up at the Olympics and underwhelm. And it's tough for me to really say that cycle is going to break this time around. They've been very outspoken about, hey, we know we have this problem and we're going to work on a double taper where our athletes come down for trials, we go back up a little bit and we come down and we actually hit our peak right at the Olympics instead of peaking early. So they're obviously aware of this. They're working on it. We'll see if it comes to fruition. But really what this does is this sets up probably one of the most exciting races of all of the Olympics, which is the 400-meter freestyle on Sunday, where you have Katie Ledecky, clear favorite in the 800 of the mile. Titmus, clear favorite in the 200 free. and they are coming head to head in this 400 that is basically a toss up. And you can bet Katie Ledecky as a dog right now in that race. And I have been doing that all week this week. And I'm very, very excited to see if there's a swim in her that will blow people away and really kind of, warrant the respect we have for her as an athlete.
Well, I'm curious about this because, like, for a lot of when we talk to you, it's about, what your numbers say and stuff like that. You do factor in travel, rest, et cetera, et cetera. So you do a good job of accounting for context, but it seems like in this, there's a lot more context to consider than there may be in the NBA and the NFL. Does that make it tough for you, knowing that, like, there are extra steps that need to be taken, or do you feel like that just gives you the bigger edge, like you were talking about before?
Well, I definitely wouldn't qualify an edge on a race like this as bigger because so much of it is qualitative.
Sure.
I mean, I literally, like, I'm banking on, I guess, quantitative in some sense that, I can tell you for sure, because Katie Ledecky is more of a distance prone, more of an endurance swimmer, that she's probably going to go out slower. Titmus has got early speed. She's going to be on the lead here for the first probably 200, 300 meters. That can benefit Ledecky if Ledecky can catch her wake, if she can, stay within reach, in the neighboring lane and kind of keep her in sight. She can come off that last 100, and because of her endurance, because of her base, because of the, because she hasn't kind of used up any of her taper, she could potentially run her down in the last 100. And so that's, there's some quantitative signal you can tease out of her races to tell you what her ability to kind of come, what her last 100 might be. And you can look at Titmus's last 100 at the Aussie trials and kind of say, did she have anything left? Did she leave anything in the pool? Or was that, like she was going all out to send a message to really kind of set, hey, I should be the favorite. I'm a big deal for this race. Like you can do a little bit of that quantitatively, but a lot of my angle here really is qualitative, and that my expectation of what Ledecky can do in terms of a drop is high. And my, just kind of qualitatively, her experience at this level, I think, is going to be important. Titmus has never been to the Olympics. Katie Ledecky won many, many golds. So there's a huge gap here in terms of experience that's qualitative that you can't really put a number on. So, yeah, and when you're in this kind of, narrative-y sort of space, sure, I tend to bet a little bit lighter in general. The big edges are going to just be like, I guess here's a great example, big edge. We're going to see the 4 a.m. on Saturday. And the 4 a.m. is obviously a long grueling event. And the women's 4 a.m., the favorite right now is Katinka Hozu. Katinka Hozu is also swimming the 200 IM. And from every clipping, every news, every piece of information that you got out there, she is dialed in on the 200 IM as sort of, that's my best chance for gold. That's where I want to go. Oh, by the way, the second competitor, the second favorite, second choice in the 2 IM pulled out to focus on the 100 back. So now it is basically a clean shot for Katinka Hozu to win the 2 IM, right? She swims that 4 IM, and you get any indication that she's close to her peak, that she's making her times, that she's, anywhere close to her form in the last Olympics where she set the world record, then her price for the 2 IM is, you'll automatically know it shouldn't be minus 200. It should be minus 800. Right? Like, you'll get a good idea early on of later races in the program, what to expect. Similarly, like where you're going to see the men's 4x200 free, you're going to see the men's 200 freestyle. You'll get some information and some data on that at the prelims, at the semis. You'll see the finals. And then there is a 4x200 freestyle relay where I have high confidence that the team from Great Britain should be the favorite. They're the dog. And I think you'll get information from the actual individual event of the 4x200 of what these guys are capable of. Are they hitting their times? Are they going? You got 4 guys going. You got multiple guys from Great Britain going best times in this event. Well, that relay then becomes even more of a plus, advantage, and you might be able to get that down at plus 150 when true price should be something like minus 200, minus 300. So those are kind of the bigger edges that you can kind of bet within the meet that I think are more useful. And I don't mind also extrapolating like team performance. Like if the Aussies all are letting down, something went wrong with their taper overall, right? Like, and vice versa. If they all are breaking world records in day 1, day 2, you're like, oh boy, like the rest of this train coming could be very, very fast. So, I think those are kind of I think, most of the plus EV bets I'm going to make on swimming are going to be days 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Day 1 and 2, what we're talking about with Katie Ledecky, Titmus, and the 400 free, that's pretty speculative. I think you're just getting, my fair price is probably closer to a pick 'em there, and you're getting her at like plus 150 or something. So I think that's a fun play, and it should be a great race.
Yes, Ledecky is plus 145 in the 400 at FanDuel Sportsbook. I am now excited for this race. It should be a lot of fun. Let's talk about the medal count, because you can bet on who will lead in gold medals. You can bet on total medals won, gold medals for each country. What's the process for capping that? And do you see any numbers that stand out in that market right now?
I've hit 5 of these pretty hard over the course of the last month. And my process, I can kind of describe it in pretty grueling detail. So you just tell me if this gets boring.
Go hard, man. Go hard.
My first crack at this before we really, because you want to use as much information as you have in your hand. And if you have if you have liquid markets, if you have hey, this offshore market is taking 10,000 a pop on judo or karate or flat water kayak, like, well, whoever they have as the favorite, huge, minus 800 favorite, fine, I'll give them a gold. Right. Like, so you can kind of like pick through some of those markets and sort of just see who the market leading expectation is in a bunch of sports, and kind of put together a skeleton of, okay, well, we've accounted for about 100 medals here. Here's how they're distributed. Any surprises, any trends, like what are we picking up here? And, and let's compare this to how these teams, how these countries did in these sports in the last Olympics. So we picked through 2016, picked through 2012, picked through 2008. And it's like, oh, wow, Australia is swimming. Great example. Australia swimming is favored for 8 or 9 gold medals. You look back, well, how'd they do in 2016? Well, they won 3. How about 2012? Well, they won 2. So it's like, oh, wow. So we're expecting a big jump here in the markets we've got, that Australia is going to take home more golds in swimming than they usually do. Similarly, diving for China, they're going to win all 8. Synchronized swimming for Russia, that's 2 for them. Like, you can pick through those markets and kind of, figure out real quickly who's going to dominate what. And then, kind of picking through, okay, well, if you break down the distribution of medals over the last handful of Olympics, in general, about 80% of the medals go to the top 20 countries in general. About 33% of your medals awarded, by country are gold. And then we can kind of look at last Olympics and see who overperformed and underperformed, right? Like, if you won 100 medals and 33% are supposed to be gold, and you actually won 43, maybe there's a little regression coming where you're not going to get quite as lucky, and your gold haul is going to be more like 33 than 43. It's totally hypothetical, but I went through that exercise as well. And then lastly, they came out with so the AP kind of polled all of their writers and cover every sport, and basically like who's going to win every medal, and kind of came up with hey, this is our prediction for gold, silver, bronze, and then kind of dumped all of that into a spreadsheet and said, okay, well, let's assume that they're 60% right about the gold. There's a 35% chance that the silver gets gold, and that there's a 15% chance that the bronze gets gold, right? And we'll add them up now all across the countries, and add sum them down. And okay, well, now this is what the AP thinks in terms of this is what their fair prices would be for each country for gold. And so kind of going through that process, you get some obvious observations right away. Like, the first one that pops, and the interesting one to talk about, is Japan as the home country is expected to win 27.5 gold medals. I think I'll look at the specifically what the FanDuel number is. It might be 26.5 because it's moved down, because 27.5 got absolutely nuked. That is a huge number. You want to know how Japan did last time around? They got, I think, 9. You want to know how they did the time before that? Something like 12. Let me pull up the exact numbers.
Yeah,
You don't think the home court in front of no fans more than doubles their?
Well, let's talk. Well, let's talk about all the factors here. But basically, on average, over the last 4 Olympics, Japan has won 11 golds per Olympics. So now we're expecting them to get to 27. Yes, there is usually a bump for the home team, for the home country. If you go back to, for instance, let's take 2008 as an example. China hosted. That was a huge deal. They obviously, that was like one of the more important modern moments for that country. Honestly, they put a ton of resources, a ton of money into developing those teams so that they could perform well at those Olympics. They ended up with 48 gold medals out of the 100 that they took home. That was way above expectation, and that was about 16 more than they won in 2004. So they got a 16 medal bump basically just by putting resources into the games and by whatever the home country bump was.
But that's more of like a 50% increase, though, right?
Yes. Sure. That right. Exactly. In a percentage standpoint, that's not anywhere close to 11 to 27. Right. So that right away is like, okay, well, where are all these extra medals coming from exactly? I think you can pretty well read between, the home crowd support we know is not going to be there. So right away we can challenge that assumption. The idea that you have this huge advantage from a body clock, circadian rhythm standpoint. Well, so does Korea, so does China, so does Australia, so does New Zealand. There's a pretty decent, set of Summer Olympic competitors who have that same advantage where they're not traveling time zones. And then, the home country gets to usually add a couple of sports. Did they add any sports that really help boost their total? The sports that got added were surfing, skateboarding, sport climbing. They re-added baseball and softball. That's one team gold potentially. And then they added karate. And it's like, okay, well, karate, maybe they're juicing the count that way. Like they have 8 gold medals. They're, awarding in the discipline of karate. Is Japan expected to win all 8? Well, let's go look at these liquid markets. No, they're only favored to win 2 out of the 8. So it's like, okay, so now I'm really scratching my head as how is this possible that you're getting anywhere close to 27 for Japan? Well, you add up, but then what did the AP come up with? And where are they coming up with golds? You add them all up. Well, their AP is actually expecting Japan to come home with 28. And let's break down where those come from. They're expecting them to get 2 in badminton, 1 in baseball, 1 in cycling, 3 in gymnastics, 2 in karate, 3 in skateboarding. That's kind of a weird one. I don't know how Japan all of a sudden dominates skateboarding, but they're expecting to get 3 in skateboarding, 1 in swimming, 1 in tennis, 1 in track and field. Okay. 11 in judo. They're expecting Japan to get 11 gold medals in judo. And out of 15. That immediately was like that's an eye-popping number. Like, you're telling me this country that only won 9 gold medals in the last Olympic cycle is going to win 11 in judo alone? Like, how is that possible? Right. And so then my process is, okay, well, let's look at world championships. What was the last world championships for judo? It was 2021. What? It was 2021? It was June. It was June of 2021. They had world championships in Budapest, Hungary for judo. So 1 month ago, they all these same athletes competed, all the same categories. Japan won 6 gold medals. And
maybe they're trying to peak for the Olympics.
Maybe they were all none of them were tapered for judo, and now they're all going to be tapered, and they're all going to win. So that was kind of shocking. It's like, well, is there a home cooking for judo scoring or something? Like, what? All the judges are going to be on the take. They're going to just give Japan all the golds for judo. And so it's like, well, what were the last world championships before 2021? Well, they were 2019, and they were in Tokyo. And so it's like, oh, well, how'd they do there? They got 5. Wow. So it's like, okay, so we're expecting somehow, some way, someone came up with the idea of, well, Japan won 5 gold medals in the last world champ, 2 worlds ago, 6 last time. Now we're jumping it to 11. That's a reach. So the individual medal markets wouldn't support that big of a number. Basically, everything has to go right for them to come home with those 11 gold medals. And even then, you're now also counting on, for sure, getting baseball, for sure Naomi Osaka winning in tennis, and for sure your one good gymnast picking up multiple individual golds on the men's side. There's a lot that has to go right for them just to get to this AP number. And so I'll fire away on the under. And then, if you get a decent bet size down on that, now you can do a couple things, because judo is all week 1.
Yeah.
So we're going to know one way or the other. If they get there 11, by the time we're halfway through the Olympics, and if they get 6, like I think is probably likely, then the second half of the Olympics, basically every individual event that a Japan athlete is even close to market in, you can just bet them to win gold, and then you're shooting for a medal, right? So that's my thought process on a market like that. It's very convoluted. There's a million pieces involved.
That's awesome.
But ultimately, I came to Japan under that way. I came to South Korea over that way. I think South Korea dominates in archery, dominates in taekwondo. Their total was 10.5 when I bet into that over. It's 11.5 other places. My best estimate is they get 14. I bet into Australia over. Even the Titmus Ledecky head-to-head aside, that Australian women's swim team should dominate. They could get 8 gold medals. They could win all the relays. They are that good. So if Australia's swim program gets the 8 that I would hope, or maybe even 9, then you're very close to the 12.5 over already. Just need a couple of the flat water kayakers and the sailors to do their job. And Australia over comes home. And then I bet into Russia over as well. This was a little bit more of a qualitative play. I think the Russia Olympic Committee has a lot to prove after 2016, where tons of their athletes were disqualified for doping and tons were not allowed to participate under the flag because of the Sochi scandal. Now, so if you just look at their past performances, specifically the 2016 Olympics, it's not going to give you a fair projection of how good they are overall. They're a very deep team, and they are in a couple sports where they absolutely dominate. I mentioned synchronized swimming; they're going to get an auto 2 golds there. Men's gymnastics, I think I had them down for 5. They're likely to take home 3 to 4 in swimming, so they're going to get up there, and their total opened up at 17.5, and that's been bet to the over pretty heavily.
I just love this image of you, like Charlie from Always Sunny at the board, like pointing to it, like this is the judo numbers are off. Like that image is just burned in my head right now.
If you told me I was going to have any interest at all in judo at the 2021 Olympics, I would have told you were crazy. But I will be refreshing. I now know exactly where to get the live judo scores as they're coming in real time, so that I could figure out how I'm doing one way or the other on that Japan golds over medal, the under in Japan golds medal market.
Well, that's awesome. Well, good luck. I hope it goes well there. And I think that'll be interesting. Now, judo, obviously a strange one for you, but you bet tennis all year round. These players. And I think the good thing with tennis is you've got good ways to measure 1v1 and stuff like that. But there are obviously differences between Olympic tennis and regular tennis, so there could be at least. So if there are differences here, what are those differences? And are there any players or pairings that may be undervalued in the market for tennis this year?
Yeah, there are for sure a lot of wrinkles that make this a very difficult handicap for someone who handicaps tennis daily. Number one, we don't have any idea right now what the reasonable expectation for court speed is. And if you don't know what your court speed is in tennis, then it's very difficult to come up with a fair price for any matchup. My current guess is that we're talking about like medium fast hard court here. It could be medium slow, but it's going to be hot. It's going to be humid. Ball's going to be flying. I would be very, very surprised if this plays to a slow hard court, but it might. The men's side is a fascinating handicap just from an outright standpoint. It is best of 3, which is different than a men's slam of best of 5. And why that matters is best of 3 tends to lend itself to more upsets. You only need to get hot for 2 sets. You don't need to have you don't need to carry that all the way through to 3 sets against a player who's ultimately better than you from a talent standpoint. So best of 3 tends to make things a little bit more random, or just opens the door for upsets. Similarly, there are day rest in between events. In a normal tennis event that is best of 3, you have to play back to back to back to back to back. There are a couple of players like Alexander Zverev who have taken advantage of that sort of setup, where you're playing best of 3 back-to-back-to-back who, have kind of thrive in that environment. You get a day of rest now in between matches. So I think that takes a little bit of the advantage away from the players who are, kind of more on the fitness side. I think that, so it opens the door kind of just for the older players, for lack of a better way to describe it. And then motivation is a huge question mark too. For a lot of the guys who are on the fringes of the tour, doing well at a Masters event like Cincinnati, which is coming up in August, that can pay for your entire year of travel and training if you do well there. The prize pool is huge. And the prestige is huge, and the points are huge. You can get a ranking bump that keeps you can enter whatever tournament you want for the whole next year if you get to that semifinal or final or win a Masters event like Cincinnati. None of that is true for the Olympics. So basically, that if you are kind of on the fringes of the tour, doesn't make a ton of sense for you to really kind of leave it all out there for country if you're, in your professional career is your other, kind of motivating factor. And then the opposite is true for someone like Djokovic. Djokovic, obviously, he's chasing a career, the calendar slam this year. He's gotten 3 of 3 so far. U.S. Open has always been a little bit of his bugaboo. So for what it's worth, I don't think he's fair priced to win the U.S. Open. I think Medvedev is probably going to beat him in the final, but we'll save that for September. Djokovic, on the other hand, has only ever won 1 medal at the Olympics. He had a bronze back in 2008. And in sort of the stage of the career he's in, where he's trying to kind of put himself up there as I'm the greatest of all time, who has gold medals at the Olympics? Roger Federer, Rafa Nadal, not Djokovic. So this is kind of his last only chance, really, to get that one piece of hardware that, you can kind of dock him for as you kind of have the GOAT discussion if you're inclined to do that. So I think the motivation for Djokovic is pretty high. I would be surprised if he takes this lightly. I would be surprised if anyone in his little corner of the draw catches him napping. He's got an easy corner of the draw. Realistically, his biggest competition is probably going to come in the final. If Medvedev emerges or Tsitsipas emerges, that'll be a tough test for him. But so the men's side's not especially bettable from an outright standpoint. And we'll have some data quickly about court speed here. I'm going to look for ace percentage as sort of my guiding factor here. If our ace percentage is in the 10-ish% range after round 1, then I'm going, oh no, this is medium to medium slow hard court. If it's in like the 11, 12, 13% range, then I'm going, okay, no, this is as I was hoping this is, or thinking this is kind of medium fast hard court. So that we'll know pretty quickly based on ace percentage what the deal is out there. And then the women's side is wide freaking open. Also, your meaningful favorite or your rightful favorite, Naomi Osaka, is representing Japan. We haven't seen her play tennis in a long time. So if she can avoid an early upset, I think she's going to make a little bit of a run here. She's rested. She's obviously trying to represent country. She has pretty decent motivation here. And she's likely to run into Ash Barty in the final. Ash Barty obviously coming off of a spectacular Wimbledon run, playing clearly world number 1 tennis right now. I think that's going to be a perfect matchup there because you really are, Barty's strength is more the natural surfaces, the grass, the clay. Naomi Osaka, this is kind of her surface, so I get why she's the favorite. But Osaka's draw is tougher. She's going to have to go through Iga Swiatek. She's going to have to go through, potentially Karolina Pliskova, who had a great Wimbledon as well. So Barty's got a much more friendly path to that final. And I think if tennis fans are rewarded, it'll be a Barty Osaka final and should be super competitive.
Awesome. Drew, are there any other sports that you're really digging into for these Olympics?
Well, I kind of want to turn the table on you here, Ed. I have not done my homework really for the athletics, which is really week 2. I did notice, however, that the U.S. during trials for track and field was awesome. They had a great meet. Anything you picked up from trials in terms of athletes to watch out for?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. I wrote over on my site about the 400 meter men's hurdles. Rai Benjamin is an American. Carson Walharm is a Norwegian that just broke the world record. He is fantastic. He should be the favorite. But Rai Benjamin is awesome, and I think he could run him down. So I think that's something I wrote up on the site. But basically, I looked at – so actually, I want to run this by you, Drew, because I looked at their average times over the last 3 years. Benjamin didn't run last year, but he's had pretty consistent times in 2019, 2021. And I feel like it's valid to do that in the 400 meter hurdles because they're going pretty hard the entire time, right? Like in some of these distance races, you kind of like the time is really determined by pace. And if someone wants to go out, you're going to, he's going to drag everyone to a super fast time, which drags down averages. So I feel like it's a little bit more valid in the sprints to look at these average times. And their average times were, 0.04 seconds off over a 3-year window. And so I agree that Warholm should be the favorite, but I like Rai Benjamin a lot, the American. Nice. And then the other thing that I think is interesting, and I wanted to ask you this in terms of the swimming. So Gabby Thomas had a great meet. She won the 200, ran a couple of times sub 22 seconds, which is really fast for women in that event. And she's the favorite, but Shanae Miller-Weibo is a woman from Bahama. She's most famous for out leaning and falling over to beat Allison Felix in the 400 meters in the 2016 Olympics. I kind of feel like she's a long-time world-class runner. I kind of feel like she should be the favorite, even though she hasn't run sub 22 yet this year. And I was wondering, like in swimming, maybe the woman from Australia just had a great meet in that 400, and is not something that's like repeatable. Maybe because she's young, or for whatever reason. So these are the things I'm dealing with in track and field.
Gotcha. There in swimming, at least, there's a more predictable aging curve. You can pretty well, there's oscillations around it related to the Olympics in particular, because people do really dial in for some. Especially U.S. People care about NCAA titles. Yeah, people care about the world championships every 2 years, right? But the real deal is the Olympics, and so there's some. Most of the swimmers are trying to peak at those 4-year cycles. And for sure, there's a sweet spot when you're a woman. It's kind of in like the 20-21 year range. And you can surprise at 16, 18. You're usually at your peak around 2021, and then you're usually a little past peak at 23, 24. And so that's kind of some way to predict a little bit of an arc as you see it coming. And so someone like Titmus, who's kind of coming into that peak window age-wise, I would expect that I don't have any reason to think that she can't go faster. Basically.
Interesting. And she's got a track record that suggests that she can go fast.
Yeah, right. And I guess the lack of a crowd is going to impact swimming, unfortunately. Like the swimmers definitely get up and swim their best and have the, kind of these momentous races when the crowd is really behind them. And I'm a little bit disappointed that they're not going to do crowds, but I get why. It's going to affect the atmosphere for sure, and it could affect someone who's there for the first time more than someone who's there with experience. But I think looking at that, the head-to-heads that you have, or the head-to-heads you can kind of artificially construct in the interim years between the Olympics are really useful.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And the real thing you should do with all of these things, the real thing that matters is the delta in every race. And you can run some kind of least squares model to figure that out.
Yeah.
Right. That would be the best thing to do. For the 400 meter hurdles, we have 2 races between those two guys. And Warholm won the first one by the smallest of margins. And then he won the second one in the World Championships in 2019 by a bigger margin. But Benjamin was hurt. Like he banged up a knee a couple days before that final. So again, context. But yeah, no, if I could bet Diamond League, I would put together this model for runners.
Nice.
And that would be cool.
You know what? If you crack this, this also applies to horse racing. I mean, this is all the same sort of conceptual stuff we're talking about. Like you're putting together past performances, and a lot of the edges in horse racing are literally like, oh yeah, I knew that horse was doing this on this day. They were trying to get the best out of him. Oh no, he was coasting because he had blank lead. Those sort of things that you can kind of put context around past performance matter a ton in horse racing. So I got to assume they matter in running. I got to assume they matter in swimming. This is individual performance at the highest level. And it's a really fun puzzle to figure out.
Well, you're talking about motivation. What motivation factor is it to avoid mandatory military service, which is in play for Siwoo Kim and Sung Jae-im? Like you were talking about Djokovic, I'm like, wouldn't mind avoiding that. So like, I feel like if you're going to talk about motivation, we got to talk about that being a potential factor for them too.
I bet into Korea gold over with that being sort of the wild card. Okay. Right. Cause I'm not counting on golf gold. Right. But the fact that those guys skip the open to tune up for that course in this competition, that matters. That for sure matters. And there's a lot of, I think that carries across a lot of other sports too. Like, obviously everyone who's going to the Olympics has dreamed about the opportunity to win Olympic gold their entire lives. But for sure, if there's some X factor that you have to dig deeper to find that last gear to get your professional career kind of, it's a big financial difference between serving 2 years in the military versus 2 years out on the PGA Tour. It's a meaningful angle as far as a motivational factor. So I don't think you can ignore it. And beyond that, the fact that South Korea is right there in terms of geography, small travel. Pandemic wasn't especially impactful for their training, not just the golfers themselves, but all of the Korean athletes. And then the circadian factors. It's all kind of in their favor. We should see some surprisingly positive performances.
And I don't want to lose Siwoo Kim on the PGA Tour. So selfishly, I would love for him to win a medal here of some kind because he's a fun guy for DFS and just an all-around delight. So hopefully we get to keep him for a bit longer. That is Drew Dinsick. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at @whale_capper. Check out the Bet the Edge podcast as well. There is a link to that in the show notes over on numberFire.com. Drew, good luck with the judo, sweating out that with the Japan medals. Just good luck overall. Enjoy watching the games, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks again, guys. That was fun.
Appreciate it. Thank you. All right. That is all we need. Thank you so much. That was great.
Yeah, Drew, you got some time. They're still coming out with lines for a lot of these track events.
Nice.
Timothy Chariot in the men's 1500 is only minus 120. I mean, I think he should be minus 400. And the only reason he's not is because he came in fourth in the Kenyan trials. It's like his one bad race the last 3 years. And there was issues whether he'd be on the team. But he's beaten the second place guy who's ridiculously talented, Jakob Ekenbrutsen. He's beaten him 11 times. 11 in a row.
Okay.
So I'm gonna put my money.
That's great.
That's the other one I got right now.
Excellent. Man.
So obviously I'll come with. I'm starting to see lines on like women's 1500. I'm like,
who is the 400-meter hurdler that you were especially high on again? Rai Benjamin. Yeah, plus 200 right now.
You can get a better number on FanDuel, which is kind of
unbelievable.
Which is very odd.
What does FanDuel have for him?
Like plus 220 or something.
Oh,
so
that's amazing. Yeah, there you go. But would you believe it or not, you can get to win $10K at Bookmaker on all of these. They are taking absolutely absurd limits. I do not know what is going on over there.
Wow, they've just been grinding Olympic stuff for like the past 3 months in preparation for this, or what's going on?
Elihu is doing his work down there. That's a great tip. Do you guys know who Elihu is?
Yeah.
He's a sharp dude, and I'm sure he would be the guy who's been grinding away.
I wouldn't have known if he would have been the guy doing this one way or the other, but pick a random sport.
Really fucking strange dude.
Is there sailing?
Yes, there is.
All right, do sailing.
They don't have lines for sailing. What the hell?
Wow.
They didn't put up sailing lines. I'll pull up shooting. Men's shooting. The shooting 10-meter air rifle men's winner. You can place to win $10,000.
All right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that's a lot. Good luck with the sweats then.
The favorite in the 10-meter air pistol is plus 280, and you can place to win 10K in that one. Like they have no clue. There are 5 athletes listed. They're all right around 300, and they're like, yeah, go.
Oh, I know. I can't wait till they come out with
this.
numbers for the men's 800. Everyone's the favorites are gonna be like plus 400.
Men's 800 in the running.
Yeah, that should be. Do they? I wonder. Yeah.
It's up now. Yeah. The favorite is Nigel Amos at plus 200.
Plus 200. Yeah, he should be the favorite. I don't think he's gonna win.
Oh. The rest of those numbers are big, man.
Yeah. So Jim.
Yeah.
I got a really important call at 3.
I'll let you guys go. Hey, take care.
See you later.
Covering the future.
Big thank you once again to Drew Dinsick for swinging by and breaking down his thoughts on the 2020 Olympics. And it's always fun to hear the way that his mind works in breaking down this stuff and the inventive methods he uses to find solutions to problems. And like, I want to know like how that all works, because like it's so intelligent the way he comes up with these solutions all the time.
Absolutely. I mean, I kind of thought about medal counts and then I didn't, because I didn't have any idea how to cap it. But of course, you should just use the other markets. You should use the markets for all the other sports to get some estimate of the probabilities of various countries getting various medals, and then use the wisdom of crowds and the AP writers to get their projections. And clearly they're going to be off, right? In some cases, right? No one predictor is perfect, but using those two sources together to find some value in that market was so typically Drew Dinsick.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I also really enjoyed hearing his takes on swimming and how much the context matters. Because that's a lot of the same things I'm thinking about in terms of track and field. And so it's good to know that process is he's doing the same type of process.
And if we're on the same page as Drew from a process perspective, I'm going to feel okay about things. So let's move now into covering the future for this week. And it sounds like, Ed, you have some track and field you want to discuss there as well.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the men's 1,500 meters. It's the metric mile. And the favorite is Timothy Cheruiyot. He's the Kenyan. He has been absolutely dominant over the last 3 years. So the second favorite, the second most likely to win the gold medal is a young Norwegian named Jakob Ingebrigtsen, 21 years old, was a teen phenom, was running with the best in the world, and is a great young runner and certainly could win gold. But these two guys have run in the 1,500 meters 11 times, and Cheruiyot's won every single one. Okay, so he's Cheruiyot really should be minus 300, minus 400, and I really believe he would be, except for a single race. At the Kenyan trials earlier this year, Cheruiyot finished 4th. Okay, so there were some questions about whether he would even make the team. He ended up making the team because the Kenyan Federation does have a choice. But to give you some idea, and there were some questions about whether he was hurt. But a couple weeks ago in Monaco, which is a traditionally fast track, he actually ran a PR in the 1,500. So for the 1,500 meters, anything under 3:30 is pretty blazing fast. And we're talking like 3:46 mile type pace. That's moving. So he ran 3:28.28. So that was his PR in Monaco. He obliterated basically all these guys that will also be in the race. So he certainly showed his form. I think he should be more of a prohibitive favorite. Over at DraftKings, you can bet this at minus 120. And I like the favorite in this one, men's 1,500.
But like, how do you? So like, that's a good reason to bet him. The other reason you could bet him is because of his name. his name is basically Chariot in a race that values speed. How would you possibly justify betting against him? I feel like my process here says absolutely he has to win, right?
Yeah, he's going to win. I actually just rewatched the 2019 World Championships, and it was remarkable. So a lot of times
Are you grinding track and field tape? This is great. We finally found a sport where we're like grinding tape. I love this. This is awesome.
So I have a mission to make, Jim.
Okay.
I will sometimes get in the mood where I want to watch random 1,500 meter races, 800 meter races. The 1972 Olympic final in the 800 meters is one of the best races you will ever see. American Dave Waddle comes back. Just go watch 1972. So I was doing this before I was betting this. This is kind of what I do to relax in some ways.
Okay.
so anyways, that was relaxing. And usually when you get in these championship finals for these distance races, it's very tactical. Like these guys essentially jog 2 laps and then start going. So when Matthew Centrowitz won the 1500 in I guess it was Rio, they jogged and then he ran a 50-second final lap and won.
Yeah.
In 2019, Timothy Chariot just ran a legit race. Like he led wire to wire. He obliterated everyone. It wasn't even close. I think he's going to do the same thing here. There's kind of a young American that's known for Cole Hawker that's known for having a kick. I don't think Chariot wants to deal with it. I think he's going to go out hard. If anyone wants to come, great. I don't think anyone can beat him.
Huh. Interesting. Okay. So you watch old track races.
Well, I watch new track races too.
What's that?
I watch new track races too.
Okay. So like you do that. There is this feature on Instagram where you can I don't use Instagram very often. More of a Twitter guy, but there's this feature where you can go and it'll show you suggested content. And it's just a bunch of little boxes that oh, you might like this. Mine is all old NASCAR races because they know that I click on those and will watch those. So every recommendation is oh, here's this 2001 Pepsi 400 at Daytona. Don't you want to watch this? And I'm like, yeah, Elliott Sadler finished 3rd. Of course I want to watch this. What do you mean? Of course I'm down. Absolutely. So it's weird, but I think we're on it's different things. But we're kind of the same vein in that regard.
Cool.
So speaking of NASCAR, I do want to talk about some NASCAR for covering the future. Not a race because they're on a 2-week break for the Olympics. But I think that at this point in the calendar is a good time to dabble in the championship market and specifically do so via Martin Truex Jr. He is 10-1 to win the championship right now over at FanDuel Sportsbook. And I think that is a tremendous number. And I've had this mindset of where I want to buy Truex for a while to buy the championship for a lot of reasons. The main one is that if you look at what Joe Gibbs Racing, which Truex is a part of this year, what they've done, it is very clear they have a singular mindset on dominating during the playoffs. And they've done well at tracks where that is relevant. They have run 7 races so far this year at playoff tracks, tracks that are representing the 10-race playoffs. Truex has won 3 of those in Martinsville, Phoenix, and Darlington. And the Phoenix one is pertinent because that's where the championship race will be held. If you look at aggregate average running position across the 7 races, Denny Hamlin is 1st, Martin Truex Jr. is 2nd, and all 4 Joe Gibbs Racing drivers are in the top 7 in that number, including Christopher Bell, who is 7th. If you lop off Talladega, because kind of fluky with the way that one works, Kyle Larson had issues there before the race, so that one doesn't really count. If you lop that off, it's still Hamlin 1, Truex 2. So I think what this says is Joe Gibbs Racing has said, hey, Hendrick, do what you want during the summer. We don't care. We want to win a championship. And they're focusing on tracks that are representing the playoffs. And they've done really well there, specifically with Truex. Now, you could use that as an argument for betting Denny Hamlin, who is 9-1, because he's been better at those tracks. If you look at his overall running positions during those races. But Hamlin doesn't have the playoff points. He is currently 1st in the standings, and that does matter for that. But only 5 playoff points thus far for Hamlin versus 19 for Truex. So it's a pretty big gap there, which increases the odds that Truex finds his way into the Final 4. So basically what I'm thinking is Truex has positioned himself well for the playoffs via those wins. And I think that he will do well in Phoenix, given that he won there earlier this year and has been very good on the short flat tracks so far in 2021. The reason I want to bet him now is because we have a couple of road courses coming up at Watkins Glen and Indy, and Truex is a contender to add to his playoff points there and get some buzz. So I think 10-1 might be the best number we get him at. And I do think that he is the best bet to win the championship right now. So to me, Martin Truex Jr., 10-1 to win the NASCAR Cup Series championship is the way to go. And Ed, this is a weird dynamic, and it kind of actually relates to something we talked about with Whale Capper, where they might not be trying their hardest at certain times. We were talking about that with swimming and, the trials of Katie Ledecky and stuff like that. But it's weird because I was thinking about that and I was like, oh, wow, this actually shows up in NASCAR too, where you want to know that context of, okay, Kyle Larson's won 4 times. He's won a bunch recently, but it's not at relevant tracks, whereas Martin Truex Jr. has been beasting there. So I think just knowing that context, which comes from paying attention, is so key in betting all these markets.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, context is important, right? I mean, I was on the Tampa Bay Bucks a lot in the playoffs because of context, right? New quarterback, new system. Maybe their passing numbers are a little bit low for what their true skill level is. So yeah, I think there's a lot of that, and it's gonna be fun for the Olympics.
Yeah,
like I said, I've been having a lot of fun. I've been having more fun with track than even I normally do.
Yeah, I didn't realize how big of a betting bonanza it would be heading into the summer. And then as things ramped up, I saw more people on Twitter talking about it. I was like, oh, wow, this is going to be nuts. And then, of course, Drew is so smart and can handle anything, and also does a podcast for NBC. They're probably going to want some Olympic analysis on there too. So,
well, NBC in particular, yeah,
exactly. So it worked out really well with the way things converged. I hope it goes well. The track is mostly next week, correct for you?
Track doesn't start until next Thursday.
Okay, so there's
not much the first week.
Okay, well, it'll be a lot of fun. I'm excited to see how it plays out. I'm excited to have a rooting for you with that one, but also rooting against Japan in judo for Drew as well. I root for them for the other ones, just not for judo, just to help him out there with that medal count. That is all that we have here for today on Covering the Spread. Big thank you once again to Drew Dinsick. Check him out on Twitter at @whale_capper, and check out the Bet the Edge podcast and the Deep Dive podcast as well. Ed, what is going on for you this week over at the Power Rank?
I had Adam Levitan on the Football Analytics Show. He's one of the founders of Establish the Run. We talked a lot about DFS. He taught me about game selection and lineup building, and that was very cool. We talked about his ebook Skin to Fur, which has a lot of awesome non-DFS stuff as well. And just a great conversation. Had a lot of fun with that. So go check that out at the Football Analytics Show. My email newsletter, trying to give you data-driven betting information. So check that out at thepowerrank.com. And if you missed, I wrote about the 400-meter hurdles and the bet I made there. So if you want to check that out, just go to thepowerrank.com/blog. Should be up at the top there. And I think that's about it.
I was trying to explain Adam Levitan's book to my wife last night. It was a complicated process to explain what that book was. So I'd recommend checking that out on the Football Analytics Show. Yeah.
Yeah, no, the book is great. I mean, basically he put together all the questions that people asked him on his podcast.
And they're deranged, the questions that he gets asked.
The only one that was truly deranged was the guy that said, oh, I picked up a toothbrush in a public bathroom and I'm using it. And I don't even remember what the question was after that. But
yeah,
that one was truly deranged.
There are other ones. If you listen to the actual podcast he does, they make me blush. That's what I would say. So he's an entertaining guy, entertaining book. Check that out on the Football Analytics Show, and check out the thoughts on the hurdles at thepowerrank.com/blog. Also follow Ed on Twitter at the Power Rank. I am at Jim Sonnes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Andy Puente, chopping up some clips from this podcast for the FanDuel Twitter account. Thank you, Andy, for that. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck whether you're betting on the Olympics, baseball, NASCAR, whatever it may be. Good luck, and we'll talk to you once again next week. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.
Aaron Dolan here. Thanks for watching, and make sure you click below on that subscribe button for more great FanDuel content, and check out some of our latest uploads and playlists right over here.